During this video, we are going to discuss plant transport system. Basically, we're going to take a walk in a plant. So the objectives are to summarize the adaptations made by plants to life on land, because the major part of why they have a transport system is due to the life on land. Look at the parts of a plant and their function and compare and contrast the structure and function of xylem and phloem tissues. So adapting to land, because in the water, plants have water always around them, so they don't really need a purpose for transporting things. But when they moved to land, they needed to adapt a few different things. One was they started to reproduce by spores and seeds in order to protect the reproductive cells from drying out. These are just a few examples of fun seeds that are dispersed through wind, the maple and the dandelion. The second thing that needed to be adapted is to have woody tissue to grow taller to get more light. There are woody stems and herbaceous stems. On the left you have the dandelion with an herbaceous stem, and on the right you have trees that have woody stems. Woody stems have lignin in their cell walls. This is the adaptation that is needed for these plants to grow tall to get sunlight, because if they're short, like the dandelion in a forest, they will die. The third is to prevent water loss, which they have a cuticle on the top of their leaf, which on the left is shown, that repels water, and stomates underneath. So on the underside, on the right, are pictures of the stomates, and that's the underside of the leaf, which are little pores that actually let air in and out. But this did not let the leaf absorb water, so this is why transport systems are actually needed, because the other adaptations are to get water and nutrients from the soil and gases from the air. They have specialization throughout the plant. They have roots that absorb, synthesize, and store things. They have leaves that evaporate, photosynthesize, and store, and they have stems that transport. The roots have little hairs to increase the surface area so they can absorb more. The leaves have more chloroplasts in their cell for photosynthesis, and they have stomates, which I discussed before, to let gas in and out. But again, no water is allowed in, so therefore they need stems to transport the water from the roots up to the leaves, and as well transport the glucose that is made in the leaves to the roots. So these stems are very, very important for transport. So in transport, those tissues are called vascular tissues, and they help move stuff from different places in the plant. And the two types of vascular tissue are xylem and phloem. Xylem is for water and anything that can dissolve in water, your inorganic nutrients, and your phloem are your organic compounds. And the way I remember this is xylem and water both begin with letters at the end of the alphabet, and phloem has an O in it, and organic compounds, phloem, organic compounds. So the first type of transport tissue that we're going to discuss is xylem. Xylem moves water, as said before, and it uses root pressure, transpiration, and cohesion adhesion in order to do this. So basically the roots fill up with water, and that gives a little pressure to push the water up a little. Transpiration at the top, if you remember the water cycle, transpiration is evaporation of water out of the plant. So because the water molecules like to bind to each other, if one leaves, it pulls the rest up, kind of like a string being pulled through a tree. And then the cohesion adhesion is the capillary action piece, where you have the water molecules that want to attach to the outside and then want to attach themselves. So they move like a little caterpillar up the stems. Now within xylem there are two types of cells. There are tracheids and vessel elements. Tracheids are the ones that water move through from cell to cell, because they have pointed ends and they have very thick walls, so the water can move up. And then the vessel elements are the wider and shorter that create water flow. So those are usually found in your leaves. So once it moves up the tracheids through the stems and then moves into the leaves and can flow freely to wherever it's needed, but doesn't have to defy gravity anymore. Because in the tracheids, if you look at the picture, much thinner, because you need to have really, really thin channels in order for the water to actually move through capillary action. Another aspect of the xylem is very important, is that it is dead, because if it was living and living cells, then they would take all the water and no water would end up at the top of the plant. So it needs to be dead cells. Sugar is moved through pressure flow through the phloem, tissue, and there are two different cells as well in the phloem. You have companion cells and the sieve tubes. If you remember sieves, and if you ever go to a hockey game and they yell at the goalie, sieve, 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 it's basically something that has lots of holes in it. So if you look at the picture on the left, the cells with the holes, those are the sieve tubes, and that's where sugar can move through because they actually have holes because sugar can't easily diffuse through the cell membrane. But the companion cells are very, very important because, as you remember, hopefully from osmosis, where sucrose goes, so goes water. So the companion cells absorb a lot of water, and that makes the sucrose go into them, and then that creates a very, very high pressure. And then it moves from high pressure to low pressure, or what's known as from source to sink. So basically, it makes sense, the sucrose goes from where it's made to where it's needed, or where it is to where it's needed. So therefore, if the leaves are full of sucrose, then they are going to be the high pressure or source of the sugar, and then it will flow to the roots, or where the low pressure or sink of it is. So this just shows the flow of the water always up, always from the roots to the leaves, and then the nutrients flow depending on the season and need of the plant. In the fall, when the leaves are dying, they want to store all the sucrose and glucose that they can, so the sugars are moved from the leaves down to the roots. And in the spring, when they need to grow and grow new leaves, the sugar is moved from the roots up to the leaves. So it actually depends on the seasons and can flow in multiple directions, whereas water always flows from the roots up to the leaves and defies gravity with the amazingness of capillary action. To clarify, not all plants have these adaptations and have to live in damp areas or in the water. So there are plants that live in the ocean and they don't have these because they're surrounded. Mosses are surrounded by water, so they don't really need these vascular tissues in order to transport. If we were a unicellular organism so small, like the sponge, then we wouldn't need a circulatory system either. So the circulatory system and transport systems of the plant and animal are very, very similar and have similar uses. So this just shows you a table to review and summarize everything. We have how water moves and how nutrients move, what tissues, what channels they move through, and the direction and method. Lastly, here are some questions for you to ponder before our next class, because we'll be discussing all of plant transport and answering some questions and enjoying the lovely discussion.